The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine gathered her children for their daily routine. She had always approached her role with quiet determination, never seeking attention, but always fulfilling her duties with grace. The palace staff had noticed something different about her recently, though they couldn't quite place what had changed. She moved through the corridors with the same composed elegance as always. But there was a new weight to her presence that hadn't been there before. Catherine had married into the most scrutinized family in the world, and she understood the responsibility that came with being the Princess of Wales. Every choice she made was analyzed by millions. Every outfit photographed, every gesture interpreted. She had learned to navigate this extraordinary life with remarkable poise. But the recent months had brought challenges she never anticipated. The loss of Queen Elizabeth had affected everyone in the family deeply, and Catherine felt the absence of the woman who had been both a grandmother figure and a source of wisdom during difficult times. The relationship between Catherine and the late Queen had been special in ways the public rarely saw. While cameras captured formal occasions and state ceremonies, their private moments told a different story. The Queen had recognized something in Catherine from the beginning, steadiness and genuine warmth that would serve the monarchy well. She had taken time to guide the young woman who would one day be Queen Consort, sharing insights about duty, sacrifice, and the delicate balance between public service and private life. These conversations often happened away from formal settings. During quiet afternoons at Balmoral, or brief moments between official engagements, Catherine never forgot the advice the Queen had given her shortly after her engagement to William. The older woman had looked at her with kind but serious eyes and said that the role would demand everything from her, but that she should never lose sight of who she was at her core. The Queen had explained that the crown was not just a symbol of power but a burden of service, that those who wore it or stood beside it needed strength that came from within. Catherine had carried those words with her through every challenge, every moment of doubt, and every triumph. The Queen's passing had left a void that everyone in the family felt acutely. Charles had ascended to the throne, carrying the weight of expectation and the legacy of his mother's remarkable reign. William and Catherine had taken on new titles and responsibilities. Becoming the Prince and Princess of Wales, the adjustment period had been intense. With increased duties and heightened public interest in everything they did, Catherine had thrown herself into her work with the same dedication she always showed. But she missed the steadying presence of the woman, who had understood the unique pressures of royal life better than anyone. What the public didn't know was that the Queen had made specific arrangements before her death, carefully considering how her personal possessions would be distributed among family members. The royal collection included pieces of immense historical and monetary value, but also items with deep sentimental significance. The Queen had thought long and hard about who should receive what, making choices that reflected not just tradition, but her personal relationships with each family member. She had updated her will in her final years, making adjustments that would only come known after the appropriate legal procedures were completed. Catherine had never expected anything beyond the emotional legacy the Queen had left her. The lessons learned, the memories shared. In the example of dedicated service were treasures she valued more than any material possession. She had her own jewelry that she wore with care, understanding that each piece carried meaning and history. The sapphire engagement ring that had belonged to Diana was a constant reminder of the legacy she carried and the woman whose loss still affected William deeply. Catherine wore it with pride and responsibility, knowing it connected her to the past while symbolizing hope for the future. The weeks following the Queen's death had been a blur of mourning, ceremony, and adjustment. The funeral had been a massive undertaking, with world leaders and dignitaries arriving to pay their respects. Catherine had stood beside William throughout the long days, offering support while managing her own grief. The children had needed extra attention during this difficult time. She had worked hard to help them understand the loss while maintaining some sense of normalcy in their lives. George, Charlotte, and Louis had loved their great-grandmother, and Catherine wanted them to remember her warmth and humor, not just the formal role she held, as the family began to settle into new routines. Legal matters related to the Queen's estate were being handled by palace officials and attorneys. These processes took time, following protocols that had been established over centuries. The royal household operated with meticulous attention to procedure, ensuring that every detail was managed properly and with appropriate discretion. Catherine had been too focused on her duties and her family to think much about the practical matters of inheritance and estate distribution. One afternoon, several months after the funeral, Catherine was summoned to a private meeting with the Queen's longtime personal secretary and the family's legal representatives. She assumed it was related to some administrative matter, or perhaps a request for her participation in an upcoming memorial event. She arrived at the appointed time, dressed simply but appropriately, her mind already moving through the list of commitments she had scheduled for the coming weeks. The palace staff greeted her warmly, and she was shown into a private office where several serious-looking individuals waited with folders and documents. Spread across a polished table, the personal secretary, a dignified woman who had served the Queen faithfully for decades, smiled gently at Catherine and invited her to sit. There was something in her expression that suggested this meeting was more significant than Catherine had anticipated. The legal representative, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and an air of formal courtesy, began to explain that they were there to discuss specific provisions in the Queen's will that pertained directly to Catherine. She felt a flutter of surprise, her hands folding neatly in her lap as she listened with growing attention to what they had to say about the late Queen's final wishes. The room felt suddenly smaller as the legal representative opened a leather portfolio and withdrew several documents. Catherine's heart beat a little faster, though she maintained her characteristic composure. She had no idea what to expect from this meeting, but the formal atmosphere suggested something more substantial than she had imagined. The personal secretary poured tea with practiced grace, a small gesture meant to ease the tension that had crept into the room. Catherine accepted the cup gratefully, holding it carefully as she waited for the explanation that would clarify why she had been called to this private conference. The legal representative cleared his throat and began to explain that Queen Elizabeth had been very deliberate in her planning for the distribution of her personal property. While much of the crown jewels and state regalia passed automatically according to established protocols, the Queen's private collection was hers to distribute as she saw fit. This collection included pieces that had been gifts during her long reign, jewelry purchased privately, and items that held special personal significance. The Queen had reviewed and updated these provisions multiple times in her later years, making choices that reflected her relationships and her hopes. For the future of the family, Catherine listened with growing astonishment as the representative described the Queen's intentions. Regarding her jewelry collection, the late monarch had left specific instructions that a substantial portion of her private jewelry was to pass to Catherine, the Princess of Wales. The representative emphasized that this is not a small gesture, but a significant bequest that included pieces of considerable value and historical importance. The Queen had specified in her will that she believed Catherine would honor these treasures appropriately and that they would be in the right hands for the future of the monarchy. The personal secretary added context that made the gift even more meaningful. She explained that the Queen had spoken about this decision during her final years, expressing confidence that Catherine understood the responsibility that came with such pieces. The Queen had admired how Catherine approached her role, never seeking the spotlight, but always rising to meet challenges with dignity and grace. She had told her closest staff that Catherine reminded her of herself in younger years, someone who had married into the family and learned to navigate its complexities. While remaining true to her core values, Catherine felt tears prick her eyes as she listened to these revelations. She had loved the Queen and valued their relationship deeply, but she had never imagined being singled out in this way. The weight of the honor began to settle on her shoulders, along with the responsibility it represented. These weren't just beautiful objects, but symbols of continuity, history, and the faith the Queen had placed in her. She thought of all the private conversations they had shared, the quiet guidance offered over cups of tea, the knowing glances exchanged during long formal events. The Queen had been preparing her in ways Catherine was only now beginning to understand. The representative continued with specific details about the collection. There were pearl necklaces that the Queen had worn throughout her reign, some dating back to her own wedding and coronation. There were brooches with incredible craftsmanship, each with its own story and significance. Diamond pieces that had graced state occasions. Emerald sets that had been photographed countless times. Sapphire items that connected generations of royal women. The list seemed to stretch on, each item described with careful attention to its provenance and meaning. Catherine realized she was being entrusted with pieces that represented not just wealth, but living history. What made the bequest even more extraordinary was the personal nature of some pieces. The Queen had included jewelry that she had worn regularly during her later years. Items that had been captured in thousands of photographs and were intimately associated with her image. These weren't locked away in vaults, but had been part of her daily life, chosen for their beauty and their personal significance to her. By passing them to Catherine, the Queen was creating a direct link between her legacy and the future of the monarchy. It was a public declaration of confidence and affection that transcended the formal language of legal documents. The personal secretary explained that the Queen had been very clear about her reasoning. She had written a personal note to accompany the legal documents, expressing her belief that Catherine would wear these pieces with the same grace and purpose that she had tried to embody. Throughout her own life, the Queen had written that she saw in Catherine a woman who understood that royal jewelry was not about personal vanity, but about maintaining traditions and connecting the past to the future. She had expressed hope that Catherine would choose pieces that resonated with her and wear them in ways that would create new memories and associations for future generations. Catherine asked if she could see the personal note, and the secretary produced a letter in the Queen's distinctive handwriting. Reading the words written specifically for her, Catherine felt the full emotional impact of the gift. The Queen had written with warmth and clarity, thanking Catherine for her dedication to William and the children, for her service to the country, and for bringing a freshness to royal duties while respecting their weight and importance. She had written that she knew the coming years would bring challenges, but that she had complete faith in Catherine's ability to meet them with strength and wisdom. The legal representative then addressed the practical aspects of the bequest. The jewelry would be formally transferred to Catherine's care, though, like all significant royal jewelry, it would be understood that these pieces were held in trust for future generations. There would be security arrangements to ensure their protection, insurance considerations to address, and careful documentation of each item. Catherine would have access to the pieces whenever she wished, with the understanding that some items might be particularly appropriate for state occasions, while others could be worn more freely according to her judgment. Catherine's mind raced with the implications of this unexpected inheritance. She thought about the public reaction when news of this bequest became known. The media would certainly have opinions about why the Queen had chosen to give so much to her, and there would inevitably be comparisons and speculation. She thought about other family members and hoped this wouldn't create tension or resentment. The Queen had made her own choices for her own reasons, but Catherine knew that anything involving the royal family attracted scrutiny and sometimes controversy. The personal secretary seemed to read her thoughts and offered reassurance. She explained that the Queen had made provisions for all her beloved family members, each receiving items that reflected their relationship with her. This bequest to Catherine was substantial, but it was part of a larger plan that honored many people the Queen had cared about. The secretary emphasized that the Queen had been very clear about wanting her decisions respected and had chosen each recipient thoughtfully. Catherine felt some of her anxiety ease, though she knew the reality of public attention would be more complicated than these private assurances. The days following the meeting passed in a strange haze for Catherine. She went through her scheduled engagements with her usual professionalism, visiting hospitals and schools, attending charity events and official ceremonies, but her mind kept returning to the private revelation about the Queen's bequest. She hadn't yet told William about the full extent of what she had learned, waiting for a quiet moment when they could discuss it properly without interruptions. The weight of this unexpected honor felt both thrilling and daunting, and she needed to process her feelings before sharing them. When she finally sat down with William in their private sitting room at Kensington Palace, she carefully explained what had happened at the meeting. She watched his face as she described the jewelry collection, the personal note, and the Queen's stated reasons for making these choices. William listened with his characteristic thoughtfulness, his expression moving through surprise, emotion, and finally a kind of understanding recognition. He reached for Catherine's hand and told her that his grandmother had clearly seen in her what he had seen from the beginning, someone with the strength and grace to carry the weight of royal responsibility. William shared that the Queen had spoken to him privately before her death about Catherine. She had told him that he had chosen well, that Catherine had proven herself beyond anyone's expectations, and that she would be a remarkable Princess of Wales and eventually Queen Consort. The Queen had said she wished she could be there to see Catherine in those future roles, but that she had complete confidence in her. William's voice grew thick with emotion as he recalled this conversation, and Catherine felt tears sliding down her own cheeks at the realization of how deeply the Queen had believed in her. They talked late into the night about what this bequest meant and how they should handle the public aspect of it. The news would eventually become known, as such significant transfers of royal property rarely remained private for long. They discussed whether to make an official announcement or let the information emerge naturally through legal channels and palace sources. Catherine expressed concern about how the public would react, and whether this might create unwanted controversy or jealousy within the extended family. William assured her that the Queen's wishes were what mattered most, and that she should accept this honor with pride. The conversation turned to specific pieces in the collection and what they meant historically. William knew many of the items from seeing his grandmother wear them throughout his life. He described memories of specific brooches she had worn too, important events, necklaces that appeared in official portraits, and earrings she had favored during family gatherings. Each piece carried not just monetary value, but a wealth of memories and associations. Catherine realized she was being given not just jewelry, but a direct connection to decades of royal history and personal family moments. Catherine asked William if he thought other family members might feel slighted by the Queen's decision. He considered the question seriously before responding that his grandmother had always been fair and thoughtful in her dealings with everyone. She would have made provisions for all those she cared about, each appropriate to their relationship and position. He reminded Catherine that as the future Queen Consort, it was entirely appropriate for her to receive significant pieces from the Queen's collection. This was not favoritism, but recognition of the role she would one day hold and the responsibilities she already carried. Over the following weeks, Catherine began the process of actually seeing and cataloging the jewelry that had been left to her. The pieces were being transferred from secure storage at various royal residences, each item carefully documented and photographed. Palace staff who specialized in royal collections worked with her to understand the history and significance of each piece. Catherine was overwhelmed by the beauty and craftsmanship, but even more by the stories attached to each item, she learned. Which pieces had been worn at coronations, state visits, and important family moments throughout the Queen's long life. Some items resonated with Catherine immediately. There was a particular pearl necklace that the Queen had worn constantly in her later years, and Catherine remembered seeing it in countless photographs and during private family visits. Holding it in her hands felt like touching a piece of living history, a direct connection to the woman who had worn it with such elegance and consistency. There were also pieces that surprised her with their modernity and style. The Queen had acquired jewelry throughout her entire life, and her collection reflected changing tastes and fashions across 8 decades. The process of going through the collection also meant confronting the security and insurance requirements for such valuable items. Catherine met with security experts who explained the protocols for storing, transporting, and wearing pieces of this significance. There were vaults to be arranged, insurance policies to be updated, and security systems to be installed. Practical realities of owning such a collection were far more complex than simply having beautiful jewelry to wear. Catherine found herself learning about gemstone appraisals, historical authentication, and the intricate world of royal artifact management as word of the bequest began to circulate quietly within palace circles. Catherine noticed subtle changes in how some staff members interacted with her. There was a new level of deference, a recognition that the late Queen had made a very public statement of confidence through this inheritance. Catherine tried to maintain her natural, approachable manner, but she sensed that this gift had altered perceptions of her position within the family hierarchy. It was both flattering and slightly uncomfortable. As she had never sought special recognition or favor, the media eventually got wind of the story, as Catherine and William had known they would. Initial reports were vague, mentioning significant jewelry bequests in the Queen's will, without specific details. But investigative journalists began digging deeper, and soon there were articles speculating about which pieces might have gone to which family members. Catherine's name appeared frequently in these articles, with some sources claiming she had received an unusually generous portion of the Queen's private collection. The palace maintained its standard policy of not commenting on private family matters. But the speculation continued to build. Catherine discussed with William and with palace advisors how to handle the growing public interest. Some advisors suggested getting ahead of the story with a carefully worded statement that confirmed the basic facts while maintaining appropriate privacy. Others argued for continuing silence and letting the interest die down naturally. Catherine felt caught between wanting to honor the Queen's gift publicly and not wanting to appear boastful or create family tensions. The decision was complicated by the fact that every choice they made would be scrutinized and interpreted in multiple ways. The situation became more complex when other members of the royal family began to learn details about the various bequests from the Queen's will. Most were gracious and supportive, understanding that the Queen had made her own choices for her own reasons. But there were murmurs of surprise at the extent of what Catherine had received, and inevitable questions about why the Queen had chosen to give so much to someone who had married into the family rather than being born into it. Catherine heard these whispers through palace staff and friendly sources, and they added to her discomfort about the entire situation. Camilla, now Queen Consort alongside Charles, reached out to Catherine privately to offer support and perspective. As someone who had also married into the family and faced years of public scrutiny, Camilla understood the complicated position Catherine now found herself in. She explained that the late Queen had been very deliberate in all her actions, and that this bequest was clearly a statement about Catherine's importance to the future of the monarchy. Camilla advised her to accept the gift gracefully, wear the pieces with pride, and not worry excessively about public opinion or family politics. The conversation with Camilla helped Catherine feel more settled about the situation. She realized she had been so focused on potential negative reactions that she hadn't fully appreciated the honor and trust the Queen had placed in her. This wasn't just about valuable jewelry, but about being recognized as someone who could carry forward traditions while adapting to changing times. The Queen had seen something in Catherine that she valued highly, and the bequest was her way of making that evaluation public and a permanent. Catherine decided she would debut some of the inherited pieces at carefully chosen occasions where they would be particularly meaningful. She didn't want to appear to be showing off or claiming special status, but she also felt it would honor the Queen's memory to wear the jewelry with appropriate pride. She consulted with her stylist and palace advisors about which pieces would be suitable for which events. Considering both the symbolic significance and the practical requirements of various engagements. The first time Catherine wore one of the newly inherited pieces in public was at a state banquet several months after the private meeting about the bequest. She had chosen a diamond and sapphire necklace that the Queen had worn at numerous formal occasions throughout her reign. The piece was instantly recognizable to royal watchers and historians, and its appearance around Catherine's neck sent a clear message about her position and the Queen's confidence in her. The response was mixed, with some praising her elegance and others questioning whether it was appropriate for her to wear such a significant piece so soon. Catherine tried not to read too much of the media coverage, but it was impossible to ignore completely. Some commentators praised the choice as a beautiful tribute to the late Queen and a sign of continuity in the royal family. Others wrote critically about perceived favoritism and speculated about tensions between Catherine and other family members. Fashion writers analyzed every aspect of how she wore the piece, comparing it to how the Queen had styled it and offering opinions about which approach was more effective. The intensity of the scrutiny was exhausting. Despite the media noise, Catherine continued to wear pieces from the inherited collection at appropriate occasions. She chose each item thoughtfully, considering its history and significance. When she wore the Queen's favorite pearl necklace to a charity event focused on issues the late monarch had cared about, the gesture was widely interpreted as a touching tribute. When she selected emerald earrings for a diplomatic reception, she discovered they had been a gift from a visiting head of state decades earlier. Adding another layer of meaning to her choice, William watched Catherine navigate this new aspect of her public role with pride and occasional concern. He could see the toll that constant analysis and speculation took on her, even as she maintained her characteristic poise in public. He reminded her regularly that she was doing exactly what his grandmother had hoped she would do, honoring these pieces by wearing them with grace and purpose. His support meant everything to Catherine. Helping her push through moments of doubt or exhaustion, the children became curious about the new jewelry. Their mother was wearing two important events. Catherine took time to explain to George, Charlotte, and Louis about their great-grandmother's gift and what it meant. She wanted them to understand that these weren't just pretty things, but pieces of family history that carried responsibility along with beauty. George, as the future king, listened with particular seriousness, while Charlotte was fascinated by the sparkle and craftsmanship. Louis was still young enough to be more interested in the stories about the Queen than the jewelry itself. As the first year passed since the Queen's death, Catherine reflected on how much had changed in her life and role. The bequest of jewelry was just one aspect of a much larger shift in her position and responsibilities. She had taken on more patronages, represented the royal family at more significant events, and become a more prominent figure in both British public life and international diplomatic circles. The jewelry from the Queen seemed to symbolize this evolution, marking her transition from supporting player to central figure in the monarchy's future. Catherine also noticed that her relationship with the British public had deepened and matured. While she had always been popular, there was now a new level of respect and recognition of her importance to the institution. People seemed to understand that she was not just William's wife, but a significant figure in her own right. Someone who was carrying forward traditions while also bringing fresh approaches to royal duties. The Queen's bequest had contributed to this perception, making visible something that had been developing over years of dedicated service. There were still challenging moments when Catherine felt the weight of expectations and the constant scrutiny that came with her position, but she drew strength from remembering the Queen's confidence in her, expressed so clearly through both words and actions. The jewelry she now wore was a daily reminder that she had earned her place through years of hard work, dedication, and genuine commitment to service. She was determined to prove worthy of the trust that had been placed in her. The second year after receiving the bequest brought new dimensions to how Catherine understood and used the jewelry collection. She had moved past the initial shock and discomfort, settling into a more confident relationship with these precious items. She began to see them not as a burden or a source of controversy, but as tools she could use to communicate messages, honor traditions, and create connections across time and cultures. Each piece she chose to wear became a deliberate choice, sending signals that those who understood royal protocol and history would recognize and interpret. Catherine started researching the full history of each significant piece in her collection. She worked with royal historians and jewelry experts to understand not just when each item was made or acquired, but the circumstances surrounding it. She learned about the artisans who had crafted certain pieces, the occasions that had prompted their creation, and the various royal women who had worn them over generations. This knowledge transformed her relationship with the collection, making each piece feel like a chapter in an ongoing story she was now part of. Writing one particularly meaningful discovery involved a brooch that the Queen had worn during some of her most challenging public appearances. Catherine learned that this piece had been a personal favorite because it had been given to the Queen by her father, King George, shortly before his death. The Queen had worn it when she needed to feel close to him and draw on memories of his guidance and love. Understanding this personal history made Catherine even more careful about when and how she wore the brooch, reserving it for moments when she wanted to channel strength and connection to royal duty at its most fundamental level. Catherine also began to think about how she might eventually pass these pieces to the next generation. Charlotte, in particular, showed interest in jewelry and fashion. often asking questions about the pieces her mother wore and the stories behind them. Catherine started sharing these histories with her daughter, planting seeds of understanding about heritage, responsibility, and the ways that objects could carry meaning across generations. She hoped that by the time Charlotte was old enough to wear some of these pieces herself, she would understand their significance beyond mere beauty or value. The relationship between Catherine and other senior royal women evolved during this period as well. Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, became a closer confidant, sharing her own experiences of finding her place within the royal family and navigating its complex dynamics. Sophie had received her own bequests from the Queen and understood the mixture of honor and pressure that came with being entrusted with significant royal jewelry. The two women found comfort in comparing notes and supporting each other through the ongoing adjustments to post-Elizabethan royal life. An unexpected development came when representatives from several museums and cultural institutions approached the palace about the possibility of exhibiting some of the Queen's jewelry collection. They argued that these pieces were part of British cultural heritage and that the public would benefit from seeing them displayed with proper context and historical information. Catherine found herself in the unusual position of having to decide whether pieces that were now technically hers should be made available for public viewing. It was a question that required careful consideration of private ownership versus public interest. After extensive discussions with William, palace officials, and cultural advisors, Catherine agreed to lend several significant pieces to a major exhibition celebrating the Queen's life and reign. She felt this was a way to share the beauty and historical significance of the jewelry while honoring the Queen's memory. The decision was announced publicly and received widespread praise for its generosity and recognition of the public's interest in royal heritage. Catherine was careful to emphasize that she saw herself as a temporary custodian of these treasures rather than their ultimate owner. The exhibition became one of the most popular cultural events of the year, with people queuing for hours to see the jewelry up close. Catherine attended the opening with William and the children, using the occasion to talk with visitors about why these pieces mattered and what they represented. She found the experience deeply moving, seeing ordinary people connect with history through these beautiful objects. Many visitors told her how much the Queen had meant to them, and Catherine realized anew the profound impact one person could have through decades of dedicated service. As Catherine's confidence in wearing the inherited jewelry grew, she began to develop her own signature style in how she combined and presented different pieces. She wasn't trying to copy the Queen's approach, but rather to honor it while expressing her own aesthetic sensibility. Royal fashion watchers noticed this evolution, commenting on how Catherine was making the jewelry her own while still respecting its heritage. This balance between tradition and personal expression became a hallmark of her public image. There were still occasional controversies and criticisms. Some Republicans questioned why one family should control such valuable cultural artifacts, arguing that pieces of this historical significance should belong to the nation rather than individuals. Catherine understood these arguments even if she didn't agree with them, and she tried to address concerns through actions. It's like lending pieces for exhibitions and being thoughtful about how and when she wore particularly significant items. She wanted to demonstrate that royal jewelry could serve public purposes even while remaining in private hands. Catherine also faced ongoing speculation about the monetary value of her jewelry collection and how it compared to collections held by other royal family members. Financial estimates appeared regularly in the media, though most were based on speculation rather than actual knowledge of the pieces she had received. Catherine found this aspect of public interest particularly uncomfortable, feeling that it reduced objects of historical and emotional significance to mere commodities. She refused to engage with questions about value, always steering conversations back to history and meaning instead. The relationship between Catherine and Meghan, which had been strained for various reasons over the years, found another complication in the jewelry situation. Meghan had received her own bequests from the Queen, but the difference in scale and significance was notable and had not gone unnoticed by media and public observers. Catherine tried to be sensitive to this dynamic, never publicly comparing what different family members had received. But the media had no such restraint, and articles regularly appeared analyzing who had received what, and what it might mean about the Queen's preferences and opinions. Through all these complexities, Catherine maintained focus on what she believed was most important, honoring the Queen's memory through service and dedication to duty. The jewelry was one aspect of that, but it was far from the only one, or even the most important one. Catherine threw herself into her patronages and causes with renewed energy, determined to prove through actions rather than just appearances that she was worthy of the faith the Queen had placed in her. She wanted her legacy to be about what she accomplished and contributed, not just about what she wore or inherited. 3 years after the Queen's death, Catherine found herself reflecting on how profoundly her life and role had changed. The bequest of jewelry had been just one part of a larger transformation, but it had served as a visible symbol of her evolution from newcomer to central figure in the royal family's future. She had grown more comfortable with the attention and responsibility, finding strength in the knowledge that she was building on foundations laid by remarkable women who had come before her. Catherine made a decision to commission a comprehensive catalog of the jewelry collection she had inherited, working with historians and photographers to create a detailed record of each piece. This project served multiple purposes. It ensured proper documentation for insurance and security reasons. It created an educational resource that could help future generations understand their heritage. And it gave Catherine an opportunity to add her own observations and memories to the historical record. She wrote personal notes about wearing certain pieces and what they meant to her. Creating a new layer of history, the catalog project also became an opportunity for Catherine to deepen her relationship with Charlotte, who participated in the documentation process with enthusiasm. Mother and daughter spent hours examining pieces together, with Catherine sharing stories and Charlotte asking thoughtful questions about history, craftsmanship, and meaning. Catherine could see her daughter beginning to understand the responsibility that came with royal heritage, learning that beautiful things carried weight and obligation along with their sparkle and prestige. An unexpected conversation with a veteran jewelry craftsman gave Catherine new perspective on her collection. The elderly artisan had worked on restorations and repairs for the royal family for decades. He shared memories of seeing the Queen wear various pieces over the years. He talked about how jewelry connected generations, how pieces were refreshed and renewed while maintaining their essential character. He suggested that Catherine might want to consider having some pieces adapted or redesigned to better suit her style while preserving their historical essence. This idea intrigued Catherine, offering a way to make the collection truly her own while respecting its heritage. Catherine began working with trusted jewelry designers on subtle modifications to a few pieces. She wasn't changing anything of major historical significance, but rather updating clasps for better wearability, having settings adjusted to suit her frame better, or creating new ways to wear pieces that made them more versatile. These changes were done with extensive documentation and the ability to reverse them if future generations preferred the original designs. Catherine saw this as part of the living history of the collection, each custodian leaving their mark while preserving what came before. The public response to Catherine's approach to the inherited jewelry had evolved considerably over 3 years. Initial controversy and speculation had given way to broader acceptance and even admiration for how she had handled an extraordinary situation. Fashion critics and royal watchers increasingly praised her choices, noting how she had developed a sophisticated understanding of when to wear which pieces and how to style them effectively. Catherine had found a balance between respecting tradition and expressing personal taste. William and Catherine had conversations about how the jewelry and its significance would affect their children's understanding of their roles and responsibilities. They wanted George, Charlotte, and Louis to appreciate their heritage without being overwhelmed by it or becoming materialistic about valuable possessions. Catherine used the jewelry as a teaching tool, helping the children understand concepts like stewardship, historical continuity, and service. The pieces became more than just pretty objects. They became conversation starters about duty, sacrifice, and the meaning of royal life. As Catherine approached a significant birthday and milestone in her time as Princess of Wales, She decided to mark the occasion by wearing a complete set of jewelry from the Queen's collection to a major state occasion. The ensemble included a tiara, necklace, earrings, and bracelet that had all been worn together by the Queen at important moments throughout her reign. Catherine's decision to wear the complete set was both a tribute to the late Queen and a statement of her own confidence in her role. The appearance generated enormous public interest and was widely interpreted as Catherine fully embracing her position at the heart of the royal family. The media coverage of this appearance marked a turning point in how Catherine was perceived and discussed. Commentators noted that she had truly come into her own, no longer seen as simply William's wife or the Queen's successor, but as a significant figure who had earned her place. Through years of dedicated work and thoughtful execution of her duties, the jewelry, once a source of controversy and speculation, had become simply another tool she used, skillfully to communicate and connect with people. Catherine's relationship with the jewelry also influenced her charitable work. She became a patron of organizations that supported traditional crafts and artisan skills, recognizing that the pieces she wore represented not just royal heritage but also the work of skilled craftspeople across generations. She used her platform to draw attention to the importance of preserving these traditional skills, arguing that jewelry was just one example of crafts that required specialized knowledge passed down through years of training and practice. The full story of the Queen's bequest eventually became public through a combination of authorized palace statements, historical documentation, and careful media management. Rather than remaining a source of speculation and controversy, it became part of the accepted narrative of the transition from Elizabeth's reign to the new era. Catherine was credited with handling an extraordinary situation with grace and maturity, turning what could have been divisive into something that ultimately strengthened public appreciation for royal continuity and tradition. Looking back on the 3 years since learning about the bequest, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude and responsibility. The Queen's gift had been about far more than jewelry. It had been a vote of confidence, a passing of the torch, and a practical preparation for the role Catherine would one day fully assume. She had grown into the responsibility, learning to carry the weight of history and expectation while maintaining her own identity and values. The jewelry she wore was beautiful, historically significant, and valuable, but its true worth lay in what it represented about trust, continuity, and the enduring strength of an institution built on service and dedication. Catherine knew that one day she would face her own decisions about how to pass these treasures to the next generation. She hoped she would have the wisdom to make choices as thoughtful and meaningful as those the Queen had made. Until then, she would continue to wear the pieces with pride and purpose, honoring the woman who had given them to her while creating new memories and associations that would become part of their continuing story. The jewelry connected past to present to future, and Catherine understood that she was simply one link in a long chain of remarkable women who had carried these responsibilities with strength, grace, and unwavering commitment to something larger than themselves.